Tonight, these 10 people share their allegedly true, creepy experiences late in the middle of the night. From people breaking into your home to creepy paranormal experiences, these stories will surely give you a fright and definitely leave you locking your doors and windows tonight. I was 14 at the time of this, so keep that in mind for context. I was sat on my bed, in my house on my own as usual. My parents were going to be out for the night and we lived in a peaceful area, so even the strictest parents would have let their son watch over the house. As I was on my laptop watching videos, I hear a knock from the door. Mind you, this was 2 a.m., and I was already paranoid from my previous experiences. There was no way I was going to answer that door, but my curiosity was piqued. Since my house has 2 floors, there was a window right above the door, which I could pull the blinds up and see what was outside. My porch light was on, so light wasn't too much of a problem. Even though my paranoia peaked, I had to look to see who was outside. When I looked, there was nobody. Nobody at all. I was about to just place the blind down when I saw someone under the light at the end of the cul-de-sac, and almost jumped backwards. This person was in a conveniently suspicious looking hoodie and tracksuit with no light showing his facial features. His arms were to his sides, and he was staring directly at me. It was weird. He didn't move at all, he just stood there under the light. After what seemed like 10 minutes, he just turned around and walked into the darkness off the main street. I sighed and went back to watching videos. Perhaps he was just some weird guy who came from the train station near my house. I had no idea, but any justification was better than the alternative. Eventually, around 3 a.m., I fell asleep. I woke up at 4:40 to the sound of my dog silently growling behind me. I thought it was because he wanted to go out into the garden, so I turned around in frozen terror. The person from the street, he was in my doorway. No light hit him from the front, and so even then, I could only make out the outline of his face. We had another moment, where I just stared into the void which was his face, only for him to break the silence with advice, which seems like silly at first glance, but I have forever took it to heart since.
Lock your back door.
And as he did last time, he turned around towards the stairs, and with me frozen in place, left my house through the back door. When I wasn't frozen stiff with fear, I sprinted downstairs and got to the back door. He was in the garden. I could only see his outline. He stayed still for a moment, only to sprint off into the woods. I never found out who he was. I didn't care to tell my parents what happened, and yet to this day, they still ask why I insist on keeping the back door locked. Honestly, I believe he was a warning. If he had been an unstable psychopath, I wouldn't be here right now. Considering some experience I've had since, I say locking your doors, even in peaceful areas, is great advice. So 2 a.m. security checker, thank you, I think. Even if your intention was bad, I still learned something from you. I've been waiting to tell this story for a while. To start off, I'm a guy, an adult guy now. But going back to when I was a kid, and I mean like 5 years old or so, I liked to wear girls' clothes. I started out like most other people and would only wear stuff in private. Nobody ever saw me. As I got older though, I started getting bolder and wanting more people to see me. I was 15 when I decided to go out in public for the first time. I was scared and nervous, not being very confident with how I looked, and I definitely didn't want my family knowing what I was doing, so I waited until everybody was gone and snuck out my bedroom window. I remember what I was wearing, a knee-high length floral dress with a light blue jacket and a shoulder-length blonde wig. It was dark and drizzling, so I figured it would be difficult for anyone passing by to actually get a good look at me. I lived on a cul-de-sac in the suburbs, so there weren't really actually any cars on the street. It was about a quarter of a mile away from a semi-busy street, so I made my way towards it. I kept walking. It was about 2 a.m., so there weren't many others out. There were so few that I could count them and remembered each one that passed. One of them that passed me was going in the same direction I was going. It was a bright red sedan. I was a little freaked out when it went by, because it seemed to slow down, and I saw it turn down the first street it came to. I didn't see it immediately turn around though, so I figured I was being paranoid. I walked maybe 500 feet down the busy street and decided that being seen by 5 cars was enough for my first time, and turned around to go home. I got back to my street, and as I turned onto it, I heard a car coming up from behind me, very quickly. I looked and saw the bright red sedan again. It slowed down, then drove past me, and turned on the street next to mine. I was on edge, but thought maybe they were just lost. I started down my street again, but watched them make a quick U-turn and head back my way. I started jogging, hoping they would drive past my street again. Then I heard them turning, and they saw their headlights coming up the street right in front of me. I sprinted into one of my neighbor's yards and hid behind a tall bush. I know they saw me on the street, but I guess they didn't see where I hid. They drove slowly, and as they passed the yard I was hiding in, I could hear someone in the car whisper screaming on the rolled-down window. "Where'd you go, girly boy? We won't hurt you." I stayed right where I was until the car went around the circle at the end of my street, passed me again, still driving about 5 miles per hour, and finally drove away. I bolted back to my house and climbed back through my window. I've been out in public a number of times since, but never again in the middle of the night. I am a nurse, and mainly work the night shift for close to 10 years, so I thought I would share one of my experiences with you. Without giving out my location, I will just say that I work in a care home, and as most know, there are a lot of deaths. One floor was closed down for renovations, so there were no patients on this floor. It was locked so that no one without a master key would be able to access this particular floor until renovations were completed. Now, I was outside having a smoke at about 3 a.m. with security when my pager starts going off with multiple call bell notifications. Please note that each one of us carry a pager, myself and the personal support workers. My pager picks up every bell from the floors that I am responsible for. So 2 floors, or 1 this night because the renovation's being completed and their pagers go off on their own patients, 16 or so. As I look at my pager, and the room numbers that I'm being alerted to are on the locked up floor, I quickly show security, who, just as confused and perplexed as I did, says it must be a malfunction. Then his phone starts ringing, and it's the extension from the desk on the floor that is locked up. He opts not to answer it. How can this be? We both looked at each other, pale. He then jumps up as he's the only one that carries the master key during a night shift, to see if he had lost it and perhaps someone was playing a trick on us. But he had the key still. Reluctantly, we decided to go to the floor together, which was in the basement of this particular facility, to see if someone got onto the floor somehow and is trying to scare us or play a prank. We arrive to the unit and it's locked up. He unlocks and we enter the dark unit and realize we are the only ones there. Yet every single call bell in every room in the bathroom has been pulled. We stuck together and went through the room for 40 or so minutes. Every call bell pulled from the room and bathroom that we had to manually shut off. We locked the floor back up and got the hell out of there. I'm working there again right now and it's 2:36 a.m. and I'm hoping nothing eventful happens tonight. I work night shift in a city about 50 miles away. This means I commute about an hour each night, there and back. My first experience was when I finished early one morning. I finished at 2 a.m. I drove to my hometown, but stopped at the 24-hour supermarket, the only place other than a McDonald's that's open 24 hours in my town. From where the supermarket is to my house, The quickest route is back roads through an industrial estate. So by this time, it was about 3:30 a.m. and I was driving through the industrial roads. I took a turn in on the road and there was an elderly man walking towards me in the middle of the road. I jumped a little and slowed down to see if he looked okay. It was a weeknight and all the pubs and clubs would have shut down hours ago. We were miles away from anything. No houses or anything were even within walking distance. He had with him one of those pull-along shopping trolleys that older people use, and a distinctive blue shopping bag. I slowed down and looked at him, but he didn't acknowledge me. I was a little concerned it may have been someone with dementia or a mental illness, but being a woman on my own in the middle of nowhere, I didn't feel uncomfortable stopping. To be fair, I was just a little creeped out and kept driving. Anyway, a few days later, I was driving down the same road in the daytime with my dad. When my dad was a bit younger, he used to work in one of those factories on the industrial estate this road was on. I said, "Oh, I saw someone weird down here the other night. There was an old guy walking in the middle of the road at like 3:30 a.m. My dad said very matter-of-factly, "Did he have his shopping trolley and blue shopping bag?" And I said, "Yes, how did you know that?" And he just said, "Oh yeah, you've seen a ghost, that's old Mick. I've never seen him, but a lot of people around here do see him. He used to walk to shops that way, but he died years ago." Now, I don't see why my dad would wind me up, and he specifically mentioned the shopping bag and trolley before I mentioned anything. The second experience I had was from leaving from work again. My car was parked around the corner from my house on a side road, as there was not enough room on the driveway. I get into my car, and as I do, I notice a white car turn onto the side road. I don't pay much attention as I'm not setting off yet. I spend a good 40 to 60 seconds buckling myself in and getting my phone out of my handbag to pick what songs I want to listen to for the hour-long commute. I glance up after a minute and notice the car pulled into the road and has stopped beside me. There's a woman in the driver's seat on her own, just looking straight at me. Her window pulled right up to mine. I jumped a little, as I didn't see or hear the car stop next to mine, and I wonder if she wants directions or if I'm somehow blocking her way. I go to put the window down, but she opens her mouth real wide, her eyes bulge out of her head, and she gave such a loud, piercing scream that I could hear it through the 2 panes of glass. Think the ending of The Invasion of the Body Snatchers for reference. She then drove off really fast and turned a corner at the end of the road before I could process what had just happened. I know this could be someone fucking with me, but she was on her own, and I was on my own, and it was just so strange and in the middle of nowhere. I was so surprised to see someone able to contort their face like that. I just couldn't explain what I had seen, and I was kind of freaked out, but I just had to laugh it off and drive to work. What do you guys think? I'm a night shift nurse in a hospital in North Carolina. Before I tell my story, let me give you some background information about my hospital. There are 4 floors total. The ground floor contains the lobby, gift shop, cafeteria, pharmacy, and outpatient services. The first floor has the lab, ICU, ER, and the vending machines. The second floor, where I work, is the med-surg hall. Finally, the third floor is mostly conference rooms and HR. In the past, the first floor contained our OB and L&D in pediatrics. These floors closed due to lack of demand in the community. Most nights, I have my routine down pat. I eat my lunch at midnight, between medication passes, and get hungry around 3 a.m. again. Naturally, I run down to the vending machines on the first floor for a snack. There are vending machines by the ICU and ER, with a long hallway cutting through the empty pediatric wards separating them. The vending machine in ICU was out of order, so I decided to cut through PEDs to get a snack from the other. As I walked down the dim stretch of hallway, I heard a noise. Upon further inspection, it sounded like a small child's laughter. Being the prudent nurse that I am, I started searching rooms to make sure that no one's kid was just wandering amok in the dark. I checked each room and saw no one. No TVs were on in any room. I brushed it off as my imagination and continued my trek to the other vending machine. On my way back, though, I heard the noise again and felt something tugging at the bottom of my scrub top. I broke out in a cold sweat and booked it for the elevator without turning back. When I mentioned it to a more seasoned nurse on the unit, they mentioned that no one else goes down there by themselves for that same exact reason. It is common knowledge that patients pass away in the hospital, and many nurses believe that some lost souls wander the corridors, looking for companionship. What do you think? I used to experience pressure during sleep when I was 15 to 16 years of age. I also experienced as if someone was touching and pressing my skin with a finger sometimes, and I used to think my brother was doing it to wake me up. I used to get up and never found anything around me. I told my parents and they advised me to chant God's name in my mind whenever such things would happen. I avoided sleeping alone in my room during those days, but surprisingly, no one except me complained about it in the house. After some span of time, I stopped experiencing those things. That's when I lived in India. Now I live in the USA. A few nights ago, I experienced a very strange thing again, and I cannot believe it. When I was sleeping during the night, I felt that I was dreaming something. Someone was touching my upper body with a palm. It felt so real. I looked around and a little boy cladded in a white sheet was next to me. When I looked at him, he gave me a look back and his face seemed painted in white too. Then, I suddenly felt scared, and I could still see that he was still there. I opened my eyes and nothing was around me. But even with my open eyes, I was feeling that someone left me with a warm touch in my upper body. I could feel it in all my senses. It was so strange. The next night, almost an hour later when I fell asleep, I suddenly felt as if my bed had started to shake. I got a strange feeling as if there was an earthquake and opened my eyes. I found that my bed was still shaking and it stopped after about a minute. I just started praying and somehow managed to sleep again. The next morning, I did not hear any news about an earthquake in my area. Does anybody have any sort of idea what this could be? Could you maybe help explain this to me? I'm just kind of scared and don't want to get woken up in my sleep again by something that I just can't see or touch. One night, when I was in the bathroom to brush my teeth, I was nowhere near the sink and it turned on by itself and turned off again. I got my toothbrush, looked in the mirror and saw nothing. I looked again and saw a white glare in the mirror that was behind me. I turned around and nothing was there. The light kept flickering on and off by itself, and no one was in there with me. I opened the door and ran out. My sister said nothing happened to her in the bathroom a little while later. At night, when I had to go to bed, I kept tossing and turning. I was restless and kept thinking about the bathroom incident. I put the blanket over my head, but my feet were out and I felt as if someone was in the room with me. I felt someone was grabbing my toes and squeezing them gently. I was too scared to look. I couldn't move and it felt like I was paralyzed. I could feel someone on the bed with me. I was so scared. It felt like someone was on top of me. I tried to scream, but it was holding my throat. I was still under my blanket and it was still on me. I kept trying to scream, but I couldn't. I also heard footsteps in my room and it finally stopped. I got out of my covers and my throat was in pain. I finally fell asleep and in the morning I was better. I told my sister who didn't believe me. I could tell my mom secretly believed me. It happens to me every night. I'm just so tired and I can't never fall asleep. I keep asking my mom if we can move and I hate waking up every night. I've had a few strange encounters over the years, but this one still takes the cake. It happened about 1.5 years ago, a Sunday evening at around 6 p.m. I'd had a big one that night before, so I'd spent my Sunday chilling in bed watching Netflix and dozed off maybe 30 minutes before this happened. I woke up to a knock on the front door. First, to explain, my bedroom was originally the foyer of the house, so the front door opens into the bedroom. Weird, I know. It used to be a huge house the landlord subdivided into a few different private entrances, and everyone else in the house used the back door. So, I wake up to a knock on the front door. I assume it's a food delivery for one of my housemates. They usually come to the front door, and if I'm not there or don't answer, they will try calling whoever ordered, who will then tell them to come around back. Because I'd just woken up and was still quite hungover, I figure I'll ignore it and let them arrange to meet at the back gate. After a couple of knocks, it stops and I start to drift off again. Maybe 5 minutes later, I wake up again, but I don't open my eyes. I have this weird feeling in my gut that I've never had before, that I'm not alone in my room. I lay there, eyes closed for a second and listen. I can hear rustling sounds coming from my left, where my room's interior door from the living room is, and I soon realize somebody is coming through the contents of myself. At first, I think it might be one of my housemates looking for my bud and not wanting to wake me. But the more I listen, the more I realize something just isn't right. I open my eyes and sit up very suddenly, turn to my left and say, "Who's there?" It's then that I see something that sends a shiver down my spine. A man, probably in his late 30s, with a very big build and dressed in black. It's standing right over my bed. I have no idea who the fuck this guy is. I've never seen him before. As soon as he sees me wake up, he mutters "shit" and disappears out the interior door into the house, closing the door behind him. Suddenly I'm alone and everything is quiet and normal. Bear in mind, I've just woken up and wasn't even sure if I was really awake. I spent a few moments questioning whether that really just happened. I decided I definitely wasn't dreaming and ran out into the living room. The guy is gone, but the back door is open and still swinging gently. I run out into the backyard just in time to hear the back gate slam close. The gate is down an alleyway that is concealed by the view of a fence. I head back into the house and check to see if anything is missing. Nothing seems to be. I ran around checking on my housemates, who are all in their rooms. The guy in the next room to me confirmed that he heard knocking on the front door a few minutes earlier. Beyond that, nobody had any clue what I had just witnessed. My best guess is that this guy was looking to rob the house. He knocked on my door to check to see if anyone was there. No answer, so he comes in the back and heads straight for my room as he knows it's empty, which he can't be as sure of regarding the other rooms in the house. It's a 5-bedroom. When he comes in, he sees me asleep and decides to tempt fate by trying to grab what he can without waking me. But in order for him to know the layout of the house this well, he would have almost have to have had seen the inside before. I was backpacking in Arkansas, the Eagle Rock Loop in the Washita National Forest. There's a section of the trail that goes through an area called the Albert Pike Recreation Area. In June of 2010, a flash flood killed 20 people, including men, women, and children. There's a ton of stories online about this event if you want to look it up. So I start my trip at Little Missouri Falls, going counterclockwise. It's 26 miles with some pretty good climbs. You can find a map of the loop on Google Images. So I hiked a fairly long day. If you Google Eagle Rock Loop map, you will find a basic sketch map, not the topo map, just one of the basic ones with the labels of the trails, mountains, and water crossings on Pinterest. At the bottom of the map there is a single water drop with a yellow circle around it. This just means it's always a wet crossing. There are several yellow circled water drops. The single one at the very bottom right next to the Viles Branch Trail. That is exactly where I was camped, so anyone can go there if you want to look it up and see what I'm talking about. So, that is the Little Missouri River.
The water is flowing away from Albert Pike. I'm maybe 4 to 5 miles downstream from where the flash flood occurred. I don't know if this is significant or not to my story, but I'm not ruling it out either. I set up camp at about 4 p.m. for the day. This was November of last year. Fairly cold nights. It was about 26 degrees the night before. I was expecting another cold night in the high 20s. Not a lot of movement around there that night when it was cold. Most animals hunker down. I use a tarp where both ends are open. I have an inflatable sleeping pad and my 35-degree sleeping bag. Now, I'm set up on completely level ground. On my pad, on the tarp inside my sleeping bag, I quickly fall asleep around 10 p.m. after sitting around the fire. Everything is normal all evening, and all night for the most part. Now, you know when you're asleep and you fall in your dream? You get that sensation like you're falling in real life when you tense up and always wake up on impact. Okay, well I was asleep and I get the sensation sort of where I feel like I'm being dragged out of my tarp by my feet. Except it wasn't by my feet, I was being pulled by my sleeping bag. Like my whole pad with me in it suddenly being dragged out quickly. I woke suddenly as it startled me. Keep in mind, it was really cold, low 30s to high 20s at this point, and I have a 35-degree sleeping bag, so I'm inside my bag all the way with the top closed off by a shock cord. I'm completely inside my bag covered to stay warm. Now, I'm wide awake and listening for any movement. Everything is still and quiet, except for the river next to me, obviously. That is the only sound I can hear. I didn't peek out my head. I just laid there awake and listening. I sat there for a good 15 minutes listening for any sound outside of the river. I never heard anything. Granted, the river is pretty loud being right there, but there was no movement around my camp at all. So I chalked it up to having that falling sensation when you dream. I figured I must have been dreaming about something and it made me feel like that I fell or something. I went to sleep for 30 or 45 minutes longer, still keeping my ears open but figuring I was probably just dreaming. So for the most part, I just shrugged it off and put my mind off of it and got back to sleep. Morning comes and I get up and put my shoes on and roll out of bed. I head straight over to the fire to pit it and stoke at the fire for first thing because it's definitely cold outside at 6:30 a.m. this morning. I turn back towards my tarp and head over to get my food hanging close by. That's when I noticed it, and I froze. My pad and sleeping bag at the foot end are sticking out from under my tarp, by a good 1.5 feet at least. I can think about how now, as I felt being dragged out from under my tarp the night before, staring at how my bed is from under the tarp. I slowly approach the tarp and look for any sort of footprints. The problem is I don't even see my own because the ground is so compact around there. I double check and I'm not in any sort of slope at all. The ground is completely flat. I really have no idea how this happened, and I know I was startled awake by that sensation of swiftly sliding down the hill towards my feet. My pad with me in it was being dragged out. I quickly had breakfast, packed up and headed out. I was supposed to spend one more night on the trail, but the longer I hiked the more I thought that what would happen the next night. These thoughts running in my head the entire day as I walked. Could it have been another person? I didn't hear anything. Why would anyone do that to anyone else? How could I have slid down so far? Maybe it was an animal. It couldn't have been. There were no punctures in my mattress and there were no footprints anywhere. Did I just slide throughout the night with restless sleep? It doesn't make any sense. I normally sleep on a slight incline, and I've never slid outside of the tarp before. Was this paranormal? I'm not far from Albert Pike. Could this been some sort of ghost trying to save me from a flash flood horror that it was reliving over and over? All day long, the same things were running through my head. I ended up hiking to my car and sleeping in there that night. The Athens Big Fort Trail was very tough going up over 6 mountains. It was almost dark after I descended the last one. I hiked the last 3 or so miles by headlamp in the dark. I wasn't keen on sleeping on the trail another night after that. Truth is, I've been on that trail a ton, and will for sure go back. I've been all over Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Colorado. Around 750 miles and countless nights spent in the woods all over the place. I almost exclusively hike solo. I never carry a gun or bear spray. I don't carry a SAT phone or GPS transponder. That is the only weird and unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me regarding camping, backpacking, and the outdoors.
I have always been a lanky and unmuscular man. Needless to say, when I come face to face with a big dude holding a knife in the middle of the night, I was pretty much fucked. I was walking home from my closing shift on a warm summer night last year, when he stepped out of the shadows and demanded my wallet. I didn't immediately reach for it. I guess I was in shock, and he stepped closer and yelled at me to empty my pockets. When the realization set in that this guy was ready to kill me over a meager $20 I had on me, a white moth fluttered between us. To my surprise, the mugger began screaming and swinging his knife at the bug, which only caused it to fly around more sporadically. Those fierce eyes, which had been looking at me for just a few seconds ago, were now shrouded in terror and not breaking their focus on the moth. I took karate lessons for a few years when I was a young boy, so I took advantage of the larger man, desperately flailing at the small insect, and performed the #1 recommended move by all reputable martial arts schools. I ran like hell. I ran all the way home, occasionally glancing behind myself, but I never saw him following. He had other matters to tend to, I supposed. So a lesson for all wannabe criminals: before attempting to commit a crime, go see a therapist for getting help over your dumb phobias.